Heidi ho, ladies and gentlemen. This is your narrator, Adam Danger Barragato, a man of action. Or at least that's how I used to sign my papers in high school to get a rise out of my teachers. All right, all joking aside, this video is really just designed to help you get through this presentation and just showcase wonderful system principles and variables and emotional intelligence and all that fun stuff. But it's very challenging, so I want to walk you through and get you started. All right, so in the words of Mario from Nintendo 64, let's go! If you didn't have a Nintendo 64, you're probably confused. All right, let's look at the big picture just so you kind of get an idea of at the most basic level, what are we doing? Well, obviously, we're picking a team, whether fictional or made up. We're choosing and executing two activities that really engage the class in your fictional or made up team's system. And then finally, you're going to process each of those activities with guided questions that really help us understand your system at a deep level. All right, so let's start with picking the team. Here's the good news. You can actually create your team like the Purple Offbeats did. They were the zombie hunters. Very funny. Brought in Nerf guns, dressed up as zombie hunters. A lot of fun. Or you can take the easy route and just choose teams like Wizard of Oz or even Space Jam. Just keep in mind, all members should be knowledgeable about the team in question, and you don't have to dress up. Please don't feel like you have to spend money. If you want to dress up, I love it. It's great, but don't spend money. Okay, all these teams were able to use what they had, or they had props, or they were able to borrow this stuff, okay? All right, let's get into the hardest part, which is choosing activities, okay? So let's look at an example from Mean Girls. A couple years ago, a team did this activity called Twisted Communication. They went out and they got all these twister boards, and they engaged each team in these questions that if they answered yes, they were essentially showcasing these Mean Girls dysfunctional team qualities, like talking behind each other's backs, or dealing with conflict very immaturely, like via revenge and not regulating individuals, not taking time to regulate team spirit, stuff like that. And so how do you get to that point? Well, you start by asking this big question, right? How do you showcase a team's unique input and parts of their process as well as desired output without using skits or videos, okay? So let me dig deeper into that question. What sort of tasks does your team have to complete? So ask yourself that question. What sort of things do they have to complete? And then once you kind of have that idea, then you can start to kind of brainstorm ways that we, as in the class, can become these characters and engage in their system with maybe these metaphorical activities that at the surface may seem like fun, but really they're walking us through a day in the life of your team's system, just like Mean Girls, except it was with Twister. All right, executing activities. Once you got an idea of what the activities are going to be, once you kind of answer those questions, then this is where this gets kind of complicated, but hopefully this will help you. Just use the teams that already exist in the class, right? That way you don't have to put people in the teams. They're already sitting together. It saves time. Also, in order to save time, please make sure each member of your team is walking around and checking on other teams as you're doing this activity to make sure that they're on task and they actually know what they're doing. And then finally, please have everything ready before class starts. A lot of times, teams will actually put together packets of information or Ziploc bags that have everything that they need to complete the activity. So that way it really saves time. So you're not passing things around. And that will reflect on your grade too if you don't use time wisely. If you have to get everything set up and the timer's going, then that's going to obviously hurt you. All right, so processing activities. This is really challenging, okay? This is two parts. The first thing is asking the right questions, okay? So please, please, please don't ask questions that can be answered with yes or no. Always ask your audience to explain. So a bad question would be, are we a good system? Well, that's an easy answer. Yes, no. So we don't want that. A better question would be explain what we do well as a system and tell people, use specific principles or use emotional intelligence or use, roles or any of these things that we discussed, okay? And then number two, make sure that you help us understand the importance or the meaning behind the activity. Remember, I have done 3 different activities with you so far, okay? And each one has had a specific purpose. And I've tried to ask you questions so that you've come to the conclusion like, oh, this wasn't just a way to kill 30 minutes. This actually had meaning behind it. Because that's memorable and it helps us understand things at a deep level. So don't simply ask, why did we do this activity? But instead, think about the activity in terms of what major flaws in our system does this activity represent? Or, in this activity, how did you overcome the lack of perspective taking? Those are just 2 simple questions. I'm sure that probably doesn't make sense, but I'm just trying to give you an example so that you can understand just kind of the depth of the questions that you need to ask, okay? All right, so processing activities part 2. Just some things to keep in mind when asking questions. Number 1, you can always explain your answers to the questions, right? Because your audience is not always going to get the main idea, but wait until after the audience has answered the questions, right? So please don't answer the question for your audience, but instead wait until everyone has answered your questions and then share your interpretation so I know, even if the audience gets it wrong, you understood what you were doing. Your activity had meaning. The system's terms were accurate. And then finally, please, please, please give your audience time, okay? So a bad idea would be to ask a question and answer it right away. I did this like the first few years of my teaching. It's a common thing that happens when your adrenaline's running. You think you have to answer the question because the audience is never going to figure it out, but you have to give the team time. So a good idea might be to either have your questions on the visual aid or have it on a piece of paper and then give the teams actual space to write it down. That way, you can then call on one person from each team and they can kind of talk about what they learned from the activity or answer the specific questions that you had, okay? And that'll save time as well and it will help you in the long run. All right, so for feedback day, which is gonna be coming up, make sure you have your 2 activities roughly figured out, okay? So that you can explain it to me so then I can say, okay, this sounds good, but you need to fix this or you need to fix that. Number 2, make sure that you can explain to me what specific areas of the system your activities are gonna demonstrate, okay? So look at the preps and decide whether it's a part of input, process, or output. Because this is a really big part of this whole project. You need to show me that you understand how your team exemplifies these system principles that we have been discussing and we will be discussing. All right, so I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope that this will help your team create awesome activities and help you process these activities in a great way so students really understand your team as a system. All right, that is your mission. Choose to accept it. This message will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Just kidding.